Welcome to the University of Toronto. My name's Alison Keith, and I'm the director of the Jackman Humanities Institute at the U of T. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Wiegand Memorial Foundation Lecture. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that we're gathered on unceded land that remains a sacred gathering place for many peoples of Turtle Island. It's the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. The Jackman Humanities Institute also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous populations, including those on whose land this institution is located. The Wiegand Memorial Foundation Lecture Series was established to honor the memory of the late Dr. William Wiegand, an alumnus of Victoria College and the University of Toronto, who won international acclaim for his pioneering work in the science of rubber compounds, and then, as a second act, immersed himself in the study of theology and classics. At U of T, Dr. Wiegand earned a BSc in chemistry and a master's in physics. Later, he added a Master of Arts in Greek from Columbia University and an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Toronto. As the breadth of these qualifications suggests, Dr. Wiegand was deeply interested in how scientists and philosophers approach some of the larger questions confronting humanity today, particularly the issues that arise from a dialogue between science and faith. To honor his memory, Dr. Wiegand's family set up a foundation, which they then in turn established this lecture series. Past speakers include such illustrious thinkers as Northrop Frye, Margaret Atwood, Robertson Davies, Sir John Eccles, and Ronald Numbers. Dr. Wiegand had an unshakable belief in the need for open dialogue between science, faith, and spirituality in the modern world, a belief that we in the Faculty of Arts and Science at the U of T share. It's an honor for the university to be involved in this series, and on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, I'd like to express our gratitude to the Wiegand family for making it possible for us to host these lectures. I'd also like to thank the members of the Wiegand family and the Wiegand Memorial Foundation for joining us this evening. Let me also just mention some housekeeping items before I introduce this evening's speaker, Professor Daniel Chua. Please mute your devices before the talk begins. And when Professor Chua has finished, there will be an opportunity for audience members to ask him questions, and the Q&A will be moderated by Matthew Shee, a doctoral student in the Faculty of Music. After the Q&A, everyone's invited to a reception in the foyer just outside, at which there will be an opportunity to speak to Professor Chua informally. And now, without further ado, let me introduce this year's speaker, Daniel KL Chua, Chair Professor of Music at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Chua earned his PhD in musicology from Cambridge University, and before joining HKU, he was the Director of Studies at St. John's College, Cambridge, and later Professor of Music Theory and Analysis at King's College, London. Along the way, he's held prestigious research fellowships at Yale, Harvard, and Cambridge. He is the recipient of the 2004 Royal Musical Association's Dent Medal, a Fellow of the American Musicological Society, and he remains a corresponding Fellow of the British Academy. He served as the President of the International Musicological Society for 5 years, from 2017 to 2022, and he's the founding editor of IMS Musicological Brain Food and the founding co-editor of the California University Press series on global musicology. Professor Chua has written widely on music, from cosmological concepts in ancient Chinese music theory to NASA's golden record on the Voyager mission. But he's particularly known for his work on Beethoven, the history of absolute music, and the intersection between music, philosophy, technology, and theology. And he's the author of 5 books. This evening, he will speak to us about music, joy, and the good life. Please join me in welcoming Professor Chua.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that lovely introduction. Dr. William Wiegand was a pioneering scientist and also a brilliant humanist who studied theology and philosophy and the classics. And he tried to bring science and faith together to answer some of life's biggest questions. So when Professor Alison Keith invited me to ponder these issues for this memorial lecture, I said, yes, of course, that would be a great honor. What I actually thought in my head was, what? You've got to be kidding me. I'm just a musicologist. And you want me to talk about science and faith and theology and classics to answer humanity's biggest questions. I'm doomed. Nevertheless, Alison, I will try and comply. But be warned. As you can imagine, such a lecture will be complex, it will be intense, and it will be very, very long. I figured that if I'm going to suffer, everybody suffers in the room. Now, for those of you who need a roadmap to sort of regulate your boredom, my lecture is in 4 parts, okay? But I only actually ask one question in this lecture. So all 4 parts have exactly the same title. Okay. So here is the question for my talk. Is music joy? Nice, right? What's there not to like about this benign question? But nice might just be its problem. You see, nice questions are not urgent questions in today's crisis-ridden world. Nice won't save the planet. Nice won't save Canada from being the 51st state of America. And besides, everybody really enjoys music. So why pursue the question further? Well, because such an answer would indeed make the question inconsequential. Music would be nothing more than a bit of auditory cheesecake, as the evolutionary psychologist Steven Pinker describes it. Its joys would have no greater purpose than to tickle our ears with the occasional, if deliciously full-fat, thrill. Music, like cheesecake, would be nice, but unnecessary. But my question, is music joy, is not really a nice question. What I'm really asking is whether music is essentially joy. Is it fundamentally joy? So I've just turned my nice question into a really stupid question, because the answer is obviously no. No, music is not fundamentally joy. And there are many reasons why this is the case. For example, sad music exists. Duh, right? Or what about music is too complex to be reduced to just one thing. In fact, of all things, why an emotion? The method is arbitrary. And in any case, no one does this reductive thing anymore. To boil music down to its essence risks essentializing music. And given our sensitivity these days to cultural diversity, its claim to universality is morally dubious. Plus, it's out of date. The term joy has long been overtaken in academia by happiness research. Happiness is mindful, it's measurable, it's modern. I mean, after all, the Americans have been pursuing happiness for over 200 years now in their search for independence, and good luck to them. Whereas joy is a bit pre-modern, is a bit pre-independence. So methodologically arbitrary, morally dubious, and socially out of date, is music joy, is a miserable research question. It should be abandoned, and my talk should end here. Thank you. Yes. But I have a better idea. I have a better idea. Rather than end the talk, I thought we should punish the question for being so stupid and ask the opposite question. Is music sad? And curiously, in today's intellectual climate, this turns out to be a very profound question. Music has been fundamentally sad for many years now in the West. And paradoxically, the proof of its tragic state is found in the most celebrated piece of joy on the planet, Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Now, you would think that Beethoven's Ninth would make a case for joy as the paradigm of music. But no, the explosion of joy in the finale was thought to be utterly grotesque by some early commentators. The theologian David Friedrich Strauss described the last movement as an ugly head attached to an otherwise pristine torso. It was a monstrous end to a classically proportioned work. So what kind of joy is this? It certainly isn't nice. To answer this question, we need to return to the place where it all began, on Beethoven's working desk. On its surface, there are three unrelated objects: a paperweight, an Egyptian inscription, and a tiny statue of the first consul of the Roman Republic, Junius Lucius Brutus. Now, these are just arbitrary things, and yet as emblems of the composer's creative vision, they provide an insight into the kind of joy shaping Beethoven's last symphony. So first, the bust of Brutus. Take a long, hard look at Brutus, because that's exactly what the statue is doing to you. And in this staring contest, you would definitely blink first. Now, the finale of the ninth begins with a dissonant shriek. Just make sure it's playing. Dissonant shriek, known as the Schreckens Fanfare. It's a sonic wall of terror. It is against this terror that human voices are mobilized to declare a state of joy. Friends, not these tones, sings a solo voice. Rather, let us strike up more pleasant and joyful ones. And so a brotherhood of joy is forged in the face of terror. The counterforce, this counterforce is seen in the stony glare of Brutus. If there's joy etched in his features, it can only be one of austere resistance. Brutus, you see, was the face of the French Revolution. He was the model of an unmoved and immovable force against the ancient regime. In the Ninth Symphony, we can hear the stoic, principled, and unyielding force as the joy that withstands the assault of the enemy. Oops. And aptly, the form of the finale is organized like a military campaign. The first thing that is required after the declaration of joy is a long march to gather the forces and unite the people. The famous joy theme is transformed into a recruiting song. One man soon becomes an army as a chorus of people gather from far and wide, building momentum until the joyful throng becomes a stampede. Wagner describes this force as battle music. What had started out as a solitary march ends as a cavalry charge, trampling over every obstacle in its path. Brutus, the unstoppable, becomes Brutus the immovable becomes Brutus the unstoppable. So what kind of joy is this? In the Ninth Symphony, joy turns out to be a moral force that defines itself violently against violence. This is the heroic joy of a defiant freedom fighter raging against unsurmountable forces. Now, this should be of no surprise, since the Ninth Symphony is often deployed as a soundtrack for gratuitous scenes of carnage on the modern screen. Here is a trailer from the great German opera Die Hart. The title of the movie says it all. Joy in the Ninth Symphony lives by dying hard. And that brings me to the second object on Beethoven's desk, the paperweight, or rather two bronze paperweights, each depicting a Cossack soldier galloping on horseback. In the 18th century, the Cossack people were a military class within the Russian Empire, highly feared by the Napoleonic army. Perhaps while composing, Beethoven played with these paperweights like toy soldiers in a war room. After all, his music often glorifies war. The Eroica Symphony and the Fifth Symphony are narratives of military triumphs. In fact, Beethoven's compositional strategies often resemble highly disciplined military formations. They are battle plans. The ultimate purpose is the charge over vast musical terrains in order to seize the final chord as victory, which, of course, is exactly what the Ninth Symphony does, and you just heard that in the music from Die Hard. If Brutus represents the joy of resilience, then the paperweights represents the joy of rampage. This is the joy of speed. Attack is the jubilant cry. And the same command closes the Ninth Symphony. But instead of writing attack, Beethoven gives the command to accelerate. It marks the final charge to victory. The closing section is a military frenzy that routs out the enemy. This is a joy that is as terrifying as it is exhilarating, as violent as it is victorious, and as tribal as it is total. And now, if concrete proof of its violence were needed, Wagner deployed the Ninth Symphony to incite insurrection during the 1848 revolutions. When fires broke out in Dresden, a guard standing on the barricades expressed his euphoria to Wagner by shouting the opening lines of the Ode to Joy. Schöne Götter funken! I did that just to wake you up. Joy's divine spark had set the city ablaze. Now, sadly for Wagner, that spark was soon snuffed out by reactionary forces. With the failure of the revolution, triumphant joy was replaced by a metaphysical doom. But these foreboding tones are already promised by the third item on Beethoven's desk, a piece of paper bearing an ancient inscription from the Temple of Sais in Egypt. It concerns the veil of the goddess Isis. The inscription begins, "I am all that has been and is and shall be. No mortal man has lifted my veil." Beethoven believed his art had the power to unveil immortal truths. But such oracular powers can be deadly. After all, these mystical lines are a warning. Friedrich Schiller, in the ballad The Veiled Image of Isis, tells the tale of a young man who lifted the veil only to be ruined by the knowledge of an unutterable truth that carried him to an early grave. In the political context of 1848, the failure of the revolution unveiled a terrifying truth for Wagner. Surrender is the only meaningful act. The composer turned to the ideas of a philosopher who, according to Martin Heidegger, made grumpiness the principle for philosophizing the world, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer extolled music as the deepest expression of cosmic reality, and so doomed music to universal grumpiness. Behind what the philosopher calls the veil of Maya is a terrifying reality. There is no access to this naked truth, but with music, you can get real close. To listen to music is to lift the veil and experience the most direct representation of an undifferentiated, impersonal cosmic will that drowns out our cries for individual meaning at the currents of the Yukon River. The will is both fateful and fatal. Resistance is futile. So post-1848, how can the Ode to Joy be joyful? Well, somehow, Wagner's young admirer, Friedrich Nietzsche, gets Schopenhauer's philosophy to party. In his first publication, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche imagines the finale of the Ninth as a nihilistic rave. Life is nauseating, declares the philosopher. But rather than struggle against this truth, humanity must affirm its futility and celebrate the wisdom to die soon. From this perspective, the Schrecken's fanfare is no longer a force to resist, but a fate to embrace. In this way, terror becomes a rave, and joy is the drug that induces an ecstatic state of brotherhood as our individual quest for meaning dissipates into a collective death drive. Nietzsche turns the table on the heroic. Die hard becomes die soon. Nietzsche may celebrate the Ode to Joy, but its essence is not joy. The title of Nietzsche's book makes this clear. The birth of tragedy is through the spirit of music. If music is joy, then it is paradoxically a tragic joy. It is fundamentally sad, even in its greatest moment of euphoria. And Nietzsche's solemn tones have resonated all the way to the grumpy old men of philosophy in our postmodern times. Here, for example, is a quote from Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe. "What moves me in music is my own mourning." And here is a statement from the father of postmodernism himself, Jean-François Lyotard. "Life laments its precariousness in an ever-forgotten anonymous death rattle. I maintain that music gets its beauties and emotions from the evocation of this condition of abandonment that is loud and mute, horrified, moist, with a promiscuity without alterity." I'm not exactly sure what this means, but it's definitely grumpy. So, we have a problem. We have just established that my question is fundamentally wrong. Is music joy is socially irrelevant, methodologically flawed, and philosophically sad? But this is not the real problem. Part 2 of my talk makes the case that my premise is fundamentally correct. Music is joy. Now, this is a disconcerting thought. It implies that the seemingly obvious arguments outlined in part 1 are blind to the meaning of the question. So it is not the question that is wrong, but our context. We are the problem. So how do we see this question in the right context? Well, we need to be in a different place. And it turns out that my out-of-date question is not out of date enough. Is music joy is a question that seemingly only makes sense in the ancient world. So we need to get into a time machine and go on an ancient tour of places that William Wiegand, as a theologian and classicist, would love to visit. We begin our journey by dialing back the clocks some 2,400 years to ancient China. Imagine yourself in ancient China. Our research question would have the opposite effect here. Is music joy would not be worth asking, not because it is obviously false, but because it is obviously true. In Chinese, music is joy, quite literally. The character for music in Chinese is also the character for joy. Although pronounced differently, the character yue, meaning music, is the same as the character le, meaning joy. Music and joy are in a homographic relationship. They look the same, but they sound different. So every time you look at the character music in Chinese, you also see joy. Now, we could quibble over whether this homograph is merely coincidental, but both the Confucian and Taoist classics clearly equated the two meanings and aligned them with the way, the Tao. Not surprisingly then, the Confucian Book of Rites announces music is joy. However, this joy is not of the auditory cheesecake variety, which is merely a nice but unnecessary pleasure. Joy is a moral disposition. It's a path of righteousness. Without music regulating society with its joy, we would literally lose the way, the Tao. So the mutual association between music and joy wasn't just a nice bit of wordplay. It had massive consequences. Now, I discovered the significance of this in 2011 as a tourist in Beijing. I was visiting the Forbidden City with a rather unusual tour group, a motley assortment of music theorists from the West. And our conference didn't go particularly well, so we felt a bit down as we meandered through the palatial complex. But as we clambered up the steps from one great hall to another and read the inscriptions above their entrances, we soon realized that had we been music theorists in ancient China, we would have been at the center of all knowledge and power. Alas, we were born too late. Even the names inscribed above each of the great halls sounded like the subtitles of our books. The Pavilion of Uniting Harmony, the Pavilion of Central Harmony, the Pavilion of Supreme Harmony. Somehow it seemed that the Forbidden City had been dedicated to us. Music and joy, then, is not simply a play of words. The entire universe and the governance of a vast empire was at stake in this homograph. So, as I stood in the Pavilion of Supreme Harmony, I could feel the joy of music rushing to my head. Somehow, in this very spot, the moral well-being of the entire universe had been entrusted to me. Now, what would a music theorist do on such epic circumstances? Now, you might imagine that the first thing I'd need is a secluded study for erudite contemplation. But you would be wrong. My first scholarly activity would be foraging. Now, this research project dates back some 400 years. Legend has it that the Yellow Emperor sent his trusted scholar, Ling Lun, to the Ranyu Mountains to collect bamboo. The task at hand was to find the perfect bamboo pipe to sound the fundamental pitch of the cosmos and so legitimize the rule of the new emperor. It was a tall order for what would be just a 4-inch tube. But to blow into this pipe was to hear the winds of heaven blow across the hollows of the earth, harmonizing the two realms as one tone. Joy was both yin and yang, heaven and earth in harmony. Now, this story founded a practice. In accordance with the myth, each new emperor in China needed to find his personal tone to resonate across his kingdom. Without his new tone, the emperor would be institutionally tone deaf and cause his reign to go out of tune with heaven and earth and bring discord to his people. He would lose the mandate of heaven. Now, this tone was a ruler in both senses of the word. The dimensions of the new pipe literally set the imperial standard for measure, volume, and weight, and regulated the entire economy of the kingdom. Music really was the measure of all things. Hence, in another play of words, the bamboo pipe, lu, doubled as the law, lu. To be in tune was to obey the rule. Joy then was not so much an emotion as a regulation that brought all things into balance, upholding the moral integrity of the universe from the movement of the stars to the political affairs of court. It was all very, very proper. We might call this relation between music and joy an aesthetic propriety because its beauty is predicated on a certain fittingness between things. To be in tune is to fit. Perfection depended on the exact relation, or as Confucius puts it, sorry, we're back. It is from music that one's perfection is achieved. Oh dear, we've spent far too long in ancient China. So please fasten your seatbelts because now we need to make a whistle-stop tour to Greece and North Africa to visit Pythagoras in Samos, Clement in Alexandria, and Augustine in Hippo. Ancient Chinese music theory had a parallel universe in ancient Greece. It was less yin-yang than Big Bang because Pythagoras famously heard the harmony of the spheres at a smithy where the blacksmiths were inadvertently blasting out harmonious intervals on their anvils due to the proportion of their hammers. Incidentally, this was the founding of heavy metal. Now, yes, so bad. Anyway, instead of a yin-yang circle, harmony for Pythagoras was arranged as a triangle known as a tetractys. The numbers represented by the 4 rows of dots, 1, 2, 3, and 4, made up the ratios that kept the Pythagorean cosmos in perfect proportion. These 4 integers justified the rationality of the universe, and joy, in the form of these well-tempered ratios, expressed a state of perfect equilibrium. To be in tune with the cosmos was to experience the joy of a well-balanced lifestyle. Now, on the island of Samos, the smithy may be the hottest party in town, but to be honest, Pythagoras' ratios are so perfect, timeless, and immaterial that its joy is a bit boring, really. And there are no surprises, there are no wow moments to get its timeless inertia moving, at least not yet. It took a paradigm-shifting movement to bring this joy to life within the perfectly rigid cosmos of the tetractys. The advent of the Christian gospel was an eruption of joy in history that shook these immutable numbers. Or as the Christmas angels sang, "Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy." The 2nd century theologian, Clement of Alexandria, was among the first to hear this sense of Jewish messianic time quivering in Pythagoras' timeless universe. Suddenly, the timeless ratios of the cosmos get to have a beginning. In fact, not just one beginning, but two beginnings. Creation, in the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and new creation in the prologue of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. Now, this word in John's Gospel, or logos in the Greek, means rationality. And given the musical rationality of the Pythagorean universe, Clement understands logos as music. So in his exhortation to the pagans, Clement describes Christ as the singing logos. So in the beginning was the song, singing creation and new creation into being. In Clemence's book, music for the first time in its history is described as autonomous music. Now, autonomos is normally used as a political term, meaning a self-given, the auto, law, nomos. But nomos in Greek also means melody. And in the text, Clement plays with this word nomos to mean both law and melody. The music of creation is both a permanent law of creation and a spontaneous melody of recreation. In other words, our planet is a doxological ecosystem. Joy is the musical autonomy of the created order, celebrating the goodness of creation. Now, let's fast forward 200 years. It's dawn on Easter Day. Saint Augustine is about to be baptized by Bishop Ambrose in Milan. It was during his conversion to Christianity that Augustine started work on his treatise on music, De Musica, which he completed a few years later in North Africa. Once again, time transforms the timeless cosmos of Pythagoras. De Musica is all about rhythm. It's still a Pythagorean cosmos in that Augustine unwinds the ratios of the tetractys as poetic meter. Now, there are 6 volumes in De Musica, and the first 5 volumes are a pedantic plod of metrical feet. It is truly pedestrian. Augustine famously defines music as the science of measuring well, and true to form, he does a lot of mind-numbing measuring of long and short syllables. But suddenly, in volume 6, something unexpected happens. It is as if music theory itself had been baptized by Bishop Ambrose. In the final volume, De Musica is bathed in a theology of music. And Augustine declares that God, the creator of all things, is music. And therefore, all things are created in rhythmic proportion. So everything is number. The qualities of these numbers are arranged in ascending order, like a ladder, rising from the material realms of the senses to the eternal realms of reason, where music in its numerical perfection is declared the hymn of the universe. So any passing pleasure that music gives on earth only finds its joy when directed towards its highest immutable state in God. So by the end of De Musica, music is not simply the science of measuring well, it's just the science of divine joy. So we've come to the end of our tour of the ancient world. Let me summarize the journey. In the ancient world, music is joy. Music is an order, both in the sense of a command and an arrangement. It is a ruler, both in the sense of a measure and a sovereign. And as such, music is an autonomous ecosystem that is non-negotiable and unchangeable. As creatures in this system, music may move us, but music itself does not move. As tuning, it is something prior to us that surrounds us and will one day outlast us. In this sense, humans do not make music. We can only seek it and obey its regulations because music is ultimate reality. It is God, truth, Tao, Logos, reason, the mandate of heaven. Joy is to be in tune with this reality. Hence, joy is not merely an emotion, it is a well-tempered disposition, characterized by a propriety that is harmoniously fitting and perfectly balanced. Are you still with me, by the way? Yes, good. Part 3. So, in the ancient world, music was joy. But is it joy? Is it joy today? Sadly, the answer is no. Why? Because everything has changed. Joy has changed, music has changed, science has changed. Let's examine these 3 changes. 1, music has changed. No one is going to download Pythagoras' greatest hits on their iPod because they're inaudible, immaterial, and timeless, which basically removes everything that makes music music today. Even if you turn your volume knob up to 11, Pythagoras is not going to rock. Today, music is real, not ideal. 2, joy has changed. To imagine joy as a ruler keeping us in line with the cosmos sounds a bit grim for today's hedonistic society. A ruler seems less like an instrument of joy than a stern implement to smack your backside precisely because you were having too much fun breaking the rules. And finally, science has changed. Wisely, it no longer employs music theorists to explain the universe. So my question is, music joy is still a big problem. Of course, when the ancient writers equated music and joy, they were not simply playing with numbers in their minds. It was a practice, a form of the good life. Their science may have been wrong, but joy and music still provided a genuine structure for human flourishing. Life was real, even if the music was ideal. So the question we need to explore, if we're to retrofit ancient values to modern music, are about the good life. So part 3 attempts to retrofit an ancient lifestyle for the modern world. And this is no easy task, since music and joy would need a modern makeover. Their relationship needs to be scientifically measurable, musically analyzable, and joyfully livable by today's standards. Now, to simplify the process, let's break the tasks down into 3 steps. 1, retrofit ancient joy to modern living. 2, retrofit ancient music theory to modern music. And 3, connect the 2 retrofitted objects, joy and music, to modern science and reposition them in the cosmos. Easy. Now, if this works, William Wiegand would be really, really happy, because science and faith would connect, and ancient and modern thought would be united, and music would be joy today. So, step 1, retrofitting ancient joy to modern living. In the past, joy was measured by music and cosmology. Today, it is measured by psychology and neuroscience, because joy is more a state of the mind than a state of the cosmos. In current psychology, joy is one of 6 basic emotions famously identified by the neuroscientist Paul Ekman: joy, anger, disgust, fear, sadness, and surprise. Now, aptly, the idea of categorizing these primary effects can be traced back to the Confucian Book of Rites. In the Book of Rites, each basic emotion, of which there are also 6, has a particular sound. Sorrow, for example, is sharp and fading away, and anger is coarse and fierce. The key, however, is not to define these emotions, but to keep them in balance. These diverse sounds need to be in harmony. They need to be in a state of joy. Joy is therefore both inside and outside the system. In modern terms, ancient joy is not merely an emotion, but a form of emotional intelligence that manages our affective reactions. Now, in contrast, the modern basic emotions are innate, reflexive behaviors hardwired in the nervous system designed for evolutionary survival. They're not heard, but seen, showing up automatically in our facial muscles as indicators of a primary emotional state. They are emojis rather than sounds. Ekman's claim is that these emotions are not culturally specific, but intrinsically human. In this sense, joy is universal. Everybody experiences joy. But for modern joy to truly resonate with its ancient counterpart, it would need to be more than one of 6 universal emotions. It would have to function as a universal set for these emotions. Now, of the 6 emotions, joy is unique as the only positive emotion. So can joy's positivity regulate the other affects as a form of emotional intelligence? Well, possibly. Neuroscience can't put a finger on joy's whereabouts. It turns out that joy is not simply a discrete emotion. It is all over the place. Unlike anger, grief, or fear, neuroscientists have not found a specific center in the brain for joy. Pleasure does have specific locations in the brain, but these pleasure centers are related to addiction, appetite, and sexual drive. They loop as self-affirming reward circuits. It just wants more of the same. In contrast to pleasure, joy, as the psychologist Sylvan Tomkin notes, can't be self-induced. You can't just make it happen by yourself, because joy is a relation that places its well-being in the interest of the other. It is an outward connection rather than a self-rewarding circuit. As the moral philosopher Robert C. Roberts puts it, joy is not a sensation, but a delight in the way the world is. Now, given this all-embracing relation, modern joy begins to resemble the harmonious fittingness of ancient joy. In evolutionary terms, we might call this the survival of the fitting. If joy is founded on fittingness, then equilibrium is its evolutionary goal. This process is nascent in any state of homeostasis. For the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, this is evident in the simplest life form. A single-cell organism automatically reacts to changes in its environment to regulate its life. This is basic chemistry, a tiny code of balance scribbled within a cell. Writ large in humans, homeostasis is virtue, is joy as virtue. Arriving at joy is simply a matter of climbing up what Damasio describes as an evolutionary tree. It looks a little bit like Augustine's ladder. It begins with reflexes and immune responses and goes all the way up the emotions to feelings and then to reason, where desires become concerns. And at the top of the tree, neuropsychology branches out into moral psychology, and here joy flowers as a virtue. Once at the top, the neural maps associated with joy, states Damasio, signify states of equilibrium for the organism. Joy, in this very modern sense, is not dissimilar to joy in its very ancient sense. It is a harmonious and balanced disposition. So we have accomplished step 1, retrofitting ancient joy to modern living. Neuropsychology can map joy as an evolutionary virtue and put a smiley face on ancient forms of propriety. This means that we can text a happy face emoji to Confucius and he would give it a thumbs up. But can this newfound joy be music? To answer this question, we need to take step 2, retrofitting ancient music theory to modern music. In the ancient world, harmony was the basis of music. Its tuning defined joy. The question for music theory now is whether harmony should still be the basis of music, and if this basis can be the foundation of joy today. So we need to ask 2 fundamental questions. Is music harmony? And is harmony joy? And we begin with the second question. Is harmony joy? Pythagoras' harmonic theory emanates from a single number, 1. Similarly, in the Confucian tradition, music is one pipe, one measure, one way. Joy in this harmonious context can happily regulate all things. And this works perfectly as long as the universe remains infinite. The infinite ensures that the harmonic order is ungraspable by human hands. However, such a singular conception of harmony can also go horribly wrong. The mathematical elegance designed to keep all things in proportion can also be instrumentalized as a violent concentration of power around which everything is forced to rotate. In the wrong hands, harmony becomes authoritarian. There is just one ring to rule them all. And unity becomes a matter of force rather than fit, and joy turns into fear. So to return to the question, is harmony joy? The answer is, well, yes and no. It depends on how you count. Now, you might think there's not much to count. Just say one and you're done, game over. Well, yes, that's how we count in the modern world today. But this is not how the ancient world counted. If you look at the yin-yang symbol, unity is a relation between two elements. Similarly, in the arithmetic of ancient Greece, the smallest number is 2 because 1 is their combination. And Christianity goes one step further. 1 is triune. In ancient thought, then, 1 is irreducibly plural. But in the modern world, it only has one sound, the total. So modern harmony may not be joy. It may be fear, a kind of killjoy harmonic theory for authoritarian control freaks. I don't know any of those people in academia. This is a huge problem for my question, and this is why we need to ask, is music harmony? Because if music is not fundamentally harmony, joy need not be defined by harmony in the first place. Now, to find out, here is a thought experiment. I want you to imagine a music without harmony. What did you hear? A tabla? A rap? An Art Blakey drum solo? You see, music can exist without harmony. Now, I want you to imagine a music without rhythm. What would you hear? You would hear no music. In 2021, Alex Rading and I published a book called Alien Listening. It proposes that music is fundamentally repetition. It is repetition on every level. Even harmony is repetition because it is made up of frequencies, which is just very, very fast repetition. In other words, everything in music is fundamentally rhythm. Rhythmic calculations are not silent numbers like Pythagoras' ratios. Rather, music counts repetition aloud in making time coherent. This is why the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz famously speaks of music as the hidden arithmetic exercise of the soul that does not know that it is counting. Music is infinite computational variety. So what does music theory look like if it is no longer ruled by harmony but by repetition? The music of the spheres would be spaghettified into a long strip of rhythm. This strip stretches to infinity at both ends like an unending glissando of repetition from slow to fast. This graduated rhythmic ruler is the new measure for music. And music can happen anywhere on this strip. And by anywhere, I mean anywhere in the universe, which is everywhere. In the book Alien Listening, I call the theory of repetition an intergalactic music theory of everything, because everything in the universe repeats, from the looping membranes of string theory to the massive shudder of gravitational waves. This rhythmic strip represents the background hum that is a fundamental condition for the existence in space-time. Humans only hear a narrow bandwidth in this spectrum, but we are embedded in this greater rhythm. Our human music therefore becomes a disclosure of the space-time universe we inhabit, but scaled solely for our ears. Music keeps us in time with the universe. So now step 3, which involves repositioning music in the modern cosmos, becomes possible. But the question is this music joy? If music is fundamentally repetition, is rhythm joy? Leibniz says yes. But unfortunately, Leibniz calls this rhythmic system harmony, which admittedly is rather confusing. When Leibniz speaks of harmony, he is not referring to ancient tuning, but to the movement of harmony in the Baroque music of his own time. He's talking about harmonic rhythm, how chords progress towards a cadence. So what is the difference between a harmonic universe and a rhythmic universe as a measure of joy? In a harmonic universe, everything is perfect and everything is simple. This cannot be said of a rhythmic universe. It is a complex adaptive system. In a rhythmic universe, the measure is not fixed at either end of a pipe or string and neatly divided into ratios. Rather, rhythm is an infinite series that is both generative and generous. This sense of continual abundance points to the key difference between a harmonic cosmos and a rhythmic cosmos. A rhythmic order is indestructible, whereas a harmonic order is highly precarious because it is too exact. Rhythm, in contrast, gives. It gives in both senses of the word. It gives as an act of donation, giving more than enough, and it has give as a condition of flexibility, giving way to difference. No disruptive element can throw rhythm off balance because there is always more time to recalculate the pattern and riff off the difference. In other words, rhythm is homeostatic. So unlike harmonic joy, rhythmic joy is a generous and flexible structure, a fittingness that exceeds its size. It is not a perfect fit, but a disproportional proportion. A harmonic universe, on the other hand, is dangerously fragile precisely because it has to be perfectly proportioned. The slightest crack and the whole thing caves in, which is precisely what happened to Pythagoras' theory in the modern world, but that's a story for another day. Rhythm, in contrast, does not promise a perfect world. After all, the world is not perfect, but it can be what Leibniz famously called a best possible world. Rhythm makes the best of what is possible in any given state. Now, Leibniz was ridiculed most famously by Voltaire in his satire Candide for proposing such a Panglossian world, especially in the aftermath of the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. But Leibniz did not propose a perfect world, which, as with the Pythagorean cosmos, would collapse with the slightest fracture. The best possible world for Leibniz remains joyful in all circumstances, however earth-shattering. Leibniz declares all happiness is harmonious, but his concept of harmony is riddled with dissonances. So joy for Leibniz is marked by suffering and marred by evil, requiring a rhythmic resolution. Joy, then, is no momentary feeling for Leibniz. It is a pre-established disposition that generates a boundless rhythmic optimism. The philosopher Gilles Deleuze is one of the few commentators on Leibniz who realized that a new musical system in the 17th century, tonality, enabled Leibniz to reimagine the harmony of the universe as cascading folds of rhythm. Inspired by Leibniz, Deleuze, with his co-author Félix Guattari, would reassemble their own cosmology with the music of the 20th century. For Deleuze and Guattari, as it was for Leibniz, everything is rhythm. But the new music of their day was not governed by Leibniz's tonal system. Inspired by the music of Olivier Messiaen, they heard an off-grid rhythm composed of divergent, dynamic, asymmetrical forces that literally make time on the go. Given such ecstatic, open-ended fecundity in the making of time, Deleuze and Guattari declare, music is never tragic. Music is joy. 2,500 years after the Confucian Book of Rites declare music is joy, Deleuze and Guattari make exactly the same statement. But the path from the first to the second statement is divergent, a movement from harmony to rhythm and from a proportional fit to a disproportional proportion. So now we have completed our 3 steps. We've retrofitted ancient joy to modern living by plugging cosmic harmony into neuropsychology. We've retrofitted ancient music theory to modern music by subsuming ancient harmony under rhythm. And we've connected the 2 retrofitted objects, joy and music, to modern science and repositioned them in the cosmos. So part 4, are you still with me? It's tough. All right, so this is the last part. So the good life. What does all this mean for our lives? In the concluding part of my talk, I return to Saint Augustine because he provides the most powerful theory of joy as a rhythm to live by. Now, you would imagine that this is found in De Musica. After all, it's all about rhythm. But unfortunately, Augustine's book requires an arduous ascent up a ladder from the material to the immaterial realms. And once you get to the top, he expects you to kick the ladder away. The eternal and immutable numbers are supposed to suspend you in higher realms with such blissful forgetfulness that you no longer react to the temporality of music or its sentient vibrations below. Now, that's all very well for a saint like Augustine. Now, he may well be able to fold his metrical feet and levitate without a ladder, but for most of us, we will be left without a leg to stand on. So in the modern world, Augustine's rhythmic theory is far too rarefied, requiring so much mental exertion to arrive at a state of joy that it might give you just a headache instead. But thankfully, Augustine has another path to arrive at joy. And this alternative route won't give you a massive Pythagorean migraine. It is a theory of disproportional proportion, which Augustine himself names joy. And this alternative rhythm is the melisma. A melisma consists of notes that extend wordlessly from a syllable as a form of rhythmic effusion, like rejoice. Now, if theorized in the musical, or if you hear me sing it, such extended syllables would sound rather silly. But to grasp this joy, the final book of the Musica needs to be read in conjunction with Augustine's commentaries on a tradition unrelated to Pythagoras, the Jewish Psalter. Psalms are not just songs, but often songs about singing. For example, Psalm 32, which begins with the exhortation, "Sing to the Lord a new song," is not only a song, but a song that commands one to sing with joy. Indeed, if properly enacted, it generates what joy to sing, a new song in the form of melismatic improvisation. As a performative speech act, the melisma is not only about jubilation, it is the act of jubilation itself. For Augustine, it is joy improvised. As such, there is nothing rarefied about the melisma. In fact, for Augustine, the melisma is a sweaty, smelly, bodily, earthy act performed every day by ordinary people going about their normal business. To describe the joy of the melisma, Augustine references the jubilus, a repetitive chant heard from laborers harvesting in the fields of North Africa as they move rhythmically to the strain of their toil. It arises, observes Augustine, from any work that goes with a swing. Now, this swinging rhythm expresses the joy of abundance, the imminent harvest. Greatly cheered by a plentiful crop, writes Augustine, the laborers rejoice over the bounty of the earth by interjecting shouts of joy between the words they sing. In the jubilus, what begins with a few words proliferates into a bumper crop of rhythms. Augustine likens this rhythmic holler to the exhortation in Psalm 32 to sing for joy. What is it to sing in jubilation? To be unable to express in words what is sung in the heart. For they who sing, either in the harvest or in some other arduous occupation, after beginning to manifest their gladness in words of songs, are filled with such joy that they cannot express it in words and turn from the syllables of the words and proceed to the sound of jubilation. The jubilus embodies an infinite, ineffable, disproportionately generative joy that only rhythm can articulate. For Augustine, the melisma names joy perfectly. Now, this joy is not merely an emotion. The jubilus expresses a joy for all seasons because it represents the entire cycle from springtime to harvest. It rejoices even in toil in expectation of an abundant future. So for all its spontaneity, the joy expressed as a melisma is not some ephemeral emotion for Augustine. It is a disposition, a form of emotional intelligence predicated on ineffable joy. As with Leibniz's best possible world, the jubilus rejoices in all circumstances, even in the midst of suffering and evil. And indeed, the jubilus has witnessed unimaginable suffering and evil. Its joy traveled as part of the African diaspora to strange lands of desolation and oppression. It traveled here to the slave markets of Canada and all the way down the Americas. Augustine would likely acknowledge the ecstatic hand-clapping, feet-stamping, glory-shouting worship of the Black American church as an echo of the Jubilus. But its origins are not from the harvest fields of North Africa, but from the cotton fields of the Deep South. The Jubilus was made manifest as a sacred genre in the American plantations. In the work songs, spirituals, calls, and ring shouts of slave culture, the melismatic power of the Jubilus was retooled to bring the spiritual realm of joy into the material present. Joy prophesied freedom into being. In fact, the ecstatic ritual known as the ring shout, where slaves would shuffle rhythmically in a circle, was known as a rejoice. Rhythm is a rejoice. It was joy that enabled the slaves to reimagine the strange land as a promised land. Here was a defiant jubilus that gestured to the ineffable by refusing to capitulate to an unspeakable evil. Unlike the tragic joy of the Ninth Symphony, here was a defiant joy that refused to imitate the evil it wants to overcome. Every shuffle of the ring shout plowed the earth with joy in anticipation of an abundant harvest of peace and justice. So, some final speculations. Music does not need to be about joy to be joy. It is inherently joyful merely by being a melisma, which is to say that all music as rhythm is already joy. Now, what does this say about sad music? Remember all those grumpy old men for whom music is a kind of death rattle? Now, obviously, sad music exists. But ironically, this objection posited at the start of my lecture is the best evidence for my premise, music is joy. Yes, sad music exists, but the very fact that it is music ensures an order that is fundamentally not sad. Otherwise, we wouldn't listen to it. From this perspective, sad music is inherently contradictory. And this is precisely why sad music is so exquisitely expressive. So Nietzsche and his circle of grumpy philosophers are not wrong. They're just half wrong. Music is beautifully tragic because of joy. Now, today, there is much to be sad about. Our politics is tragic. Our planet is in existential crisis. In the ancient world, music taught us how we might govern our planet and our politics with the rule of joy. What about today? If music is joy, then music indicates a way of being in the world. Joy is a celebratory, co-creative relation that points to the goodness of our planet. Rhythm does not promise a perfect world, but the hope of a best possible world. It is, like the ring shout, a rejoice that toils and suffers in expectation of a harvest of righteousness. Whatever the circumstances, however tragic or violent, as long as music exists, nothing can seal our fate, because in its very ineffability, music articulates a jubilus that refuses to end. Thank you.
May I invite you to take a seat, and I'll invite Matthew to come up and to moderate questions, and the floor is open. And we have someone, if you raise your hand, we have someone who's running a mic, and so you are in a position to ask.
Oh, did you follow the talk? Was it hard? Oh, I have 3 rules, by the way, for questions. A, B, and C. A, be articulate. Please wait for your mic and prepare your question in advance. B, be brief. This is not a chance for you to tell me about your life. And C, be centered. Focus on the talk today. Let's not talk about anything else except for the talk. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. Very enjoyable. I just thought I'd get in here because had a question about your last conclusion, in a sense. So music, melismatic, rhythmic, joyful, jubilant. And this provides some hope. So how, it seems to me, looking forward, what we need is some kind of ethical dimension to that hope. I'm just wondering how music is ethical, or if music is ethical, or if this joy is ethical.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think this is where I'll bring in my Chinese philosophy hat. Usually in Western virtues, the idea of flexibility and balance don't really come into that as a virtue. But of course, in the Chinese tradition, particularly the tradition I talked about with Confucius and also the Taoist tradition, the idea of being in balance, finding that kind of middle way, that idea of homeostasis is actually an ethical stance of some kind. It is the need, really, if you like, to listen and to respond and to be able to react in a way where the other really counts, where you're trying to find that relation, that balance with that thing. And so if music in some sense is able, or rhythm in some sense is able to teach us about how that sense of balance, equilibrium, that kind of listening and reacting and then riffing off difference. And so if that music can do that, I think there is, even in that very simple sense, an ethical dimension. Of course, you can go even further and talk in sort of Augustinian or Clementine ways about the universe as a created order. Is the order of the universe itself good? Okay, that's a question. And of course, for them, music, the fact that music exists and the music is in some sense expressed in the universe, it says the universe is good. And if the universe is good, then it sort of has implications for the way we live. And that's another way of thinking about it, but that requires a more sort of spiritual, religious step to take. So those are the two things I would mention. Does that answer your question? Sort of. Sorry.
My question is, what music brings you joy?
Oh, you have to read my book. It's funny. The book is called, what is it called? Music and Joy. And it's a difficult question in a funny way, right? Because I say something like, some days I just don't feel like listening to music, right? I just want to be alone in my room or walking around. But then I sort of make the argument, basically from John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, that actually everything is music. And if we really attend to the world in that way, that is the music that you can also listen to. So in a way, everything really can be music. And in that sense, it's more about yourself rather than about what music makes you happy. Of course, there's many great pieces of music that makes me happy, like listening to a Mozart piano concerto or a Joni Mitchell song, right? But I think it's really more about the way you listen and the way you attend to the sounds around you. Because if it is true that everything in one sense is music, if, as John Cage puts it, if I put a sort of 4 minutes and 33, seconds of whatever is there, and you're just listening, what is your experience? Can you then take pleasure in that? And so, yeah, so it's a difficult question for me to answer, because even if I told you I like this piece of music, it's not really an answer to that question about my joy in it. Yeah.
Hi, great talk, thank you. I just wondered, do you think that we could have joyful music without sad music? In other words, would we tire of the joyfulness if we couldn't juxtapose it with something sad that hit us on those levels?
Yeah, can you imagine going to Pythagoras' heaven, and you will just have perfect harmony, and you'll be listening to them the whole day, right? It'd be terrible. You do not want to be in that heaven. It'd be absolutely appalling. No, I think that would be terrible. I don't think music is that, because I think the idea that there's only, the idea of joy as just purely harmonious doesn't work for me. It's too perfect. It's just not a reality on this planet, right? So yes, I believe that, yeah, let's just call it sad music, or any kind of music that expresses these other things that we experience is absolutely essential. But the question is, why do we listen to it, right? why doesn't it just fall apart? I didn't mention it, I took the quote out, but it's from a philosopher that I like called Theodor Adorno, who says that really, and he's talking about hope, that when music exists, there's always hope because music just continues to keep going, right? It just keeps going. You cannot listen to music, you cannot listen to music that aims for despair without hope. Because even in that attempt to aim for despair, there is already hope, right? It's the same, I think, with joy. Even if you listen to the saddest music on the planet, right? The fact that it is music gives you a sense of joy already. So I think that's a much richer understanding of joy than just, let's say, just joyful celebratory music, which may be a little bit kind of superficial kind of joy. This is why I had to go at sort of like just too hedonistic a sense of joy, where it's just a kind of emotional thrill, because that to me isn't really what the ancients would call joy. That's just pleasure, right? Joy is a much deeper moral disposition.
If we accept your premise that music is joy, does it depend upon the listeners? The reason I ask that is we've recently celebrated the liberation of Auschwitz. And as you know, I assume that they had an orchestra there. People listening to that, would they have hope? And does it depend upon who's playing and who's listening? And also, I guess, the meaningfulness of the music.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll begin, first of all, by saying that I don't think you need to have humans to have music. I think music exists prior to humans, right? But we humans do make music, and it's part of our culture, it's part of the way we live, right? And we humans are complicated things, right? We tend to weaponize things. I mean, like the Ode to Joy, we would weaponize joy and make it a kind of triumphant, sort of celebratory, violent kind of joy. And we still play that music because we find it to be joyful and celebratory. And that, oh, by the way, I should just mention that in my book, I redeemed the Ninth Symphony. So I'm just not a bad professor that sort of trashes all great music. No, I do nice things to the Ninth Symphony as well. But yes, we do use music in ways, we instrumentalize music in ways that is bad, all right? I mean, you can be playing music very loudly in Auschwitz while experimenting on humans, for example. I mean, that's what they did, right? You can use music really, really badly. And we can force people to play music for our own pleasure and make them suffer and that kind of thing. We can do that. But does that make music a bad thing, right? So in these circumstances, what you're talking about, meaning and the context and what things signify, those come definitely into play in that situation. And I think it's very complicated, the question you asked about Auschwitz, because there's a lot of deception, even in asking those people to play, right? Because they thought they were going to get out of something by being in that orchestra and so on. And of course, that never happened and so on. But I do mention in the book Music and Joy the performance of Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, which is a very famous, one of the most famous premieres in the 20th century, apart from The Rite of Spring, because it took place in a prison of war camp in the Second World War. It wasn't Auschwitz. It was for prisoners of war that were just caught from the war. And Messiaen was there, and they did this performance, and he describes this performance that was, on this piano that hardly worked with keys missing, and the cello only had 3 strings, and there was a clarinetist, and there was a violinist, and they did this thing, and all these, I think it's a little bit of an overstated claim, but all these, 5,000 people turned up, and he said something extraordinary happened there. So joy happened there. For that one moment, somehow a different space had descended upon that prison. So I think there is a possibility where music brings something, some kind of hope or some kind of prophetic vision of something else that is possible in circumstances like that. There's a film, do you know, called Shawshank Redemption? I don't know that, where the similar thing happens, where somebody plays a Mozart aria to all these prisoners through these loudspeakers. And for that single moment, this is in the film, that single moment, everything suddenly is suspended. They no longer feel they are suspended within that prison context. But somehow music had taken them out of that with a different reality that promised something, and that promise was something that this person, I can't remember, Andy, I think it's Andy Dufresne or something, carried with him. So even when he was put into a small dark cell alone, he said, no, I had Mr. Mozart with me, and that kept me going. So I think, there is a place for music to be more than the circumstances in which it happens. But you can also use music in a really bad way.
A question in the front.
Thank you. I'd like to make a short statement, then follow up with a question. When I heard that someone talk about Auschwitz, then recently I read that during the, like in the concentration camps, the German guards made the Jewish prisoners to play classical music for their enjoyment, that sort of thing. And then I keep thinking, what would the Palestinians in Gaza make music or sad sounds during the genocide, past 15 months? You show us the Confucian conception of the Book of Rights of music being order, harmonious relationship, but some would interpret that or stretch it to be more hierarchical, straight line, top down. And that in juxtaposition would be the Taoist concept of freedom, of complementarity, of naturalness, spontaneity, also effortless effort. And that, to me, a Taoist musician would make sounds like natural, the wind, the rain, the thunder, the river flowing, bird calls, and then the sound of falling snow. So what do you think of this Taoist conception of natural sounds of music?
Yeah, I didn't talk much about the Taoist concept. In what I presented, I kind of mixed the two together in a way. Yes, the Confucian concept of, Confucian is just a very ordered, harmonious system. It's a tuning system. And it can go horribly wrong, as I explained. You can have a kind of harmony that is basically authoritarian. Confucius did not mean that at all. And one of the key things, I think, in Confucius' thought is that the idea of harmony, but not the same, right? It's difference in harmony. So it's he, it's harmony or tuning, and bu yi yang, not the same, right? That is a very important concept within the Confucian system. But what happened in ancient China was, of course, there was a kind of conflation of both Confucius and Taoist thought in their music theory. And the wonderful thing about Taoist thought is that, it is far more, let's put it, it's less hierarchical, right? There's a wonderful passage called The Piping of Heaven, where he, I can't remember who it was now, that describes how the whole earth is basically just belching, right? All the orifices of the earth are just making this sound, and it's just this wee wang, it's like, it's almost like, it's like John Cage really kind of music. So they could hear the whole of nature creating sound. But this is actually the same concept where humans are just one element within a much bigger orchestra, which is the ecosystem of the entire universe, right? That's the whole concept. Whether that tuning is very, very, very refined, like as in Confucius, or a little bit more playful, as in Taoism, it's a matter of how you want to calibrate your tuning, I guess, in the area. But yeah, I think both should coexist, and I think they do quite often within Chinese music theory.
In the front here.
I'm struggling to find the words. This is going to be a statement. I'm going to try to keep it to a sentence or two. I found it very difficult when Auschwitz is mentioned alongside, without any other comment, the labeling of the very difficult situation in Gaza as genocide, without it being said from the podium, at the very minimum, that this is not the place for political statements and labeling, of which there are a lot of different opinions.
So Sorry, there was a question there or not?
It was a
It's
comment
just a
about
statement.
it
Okay.
was a statement
All right.
about the different
Okay.
speaker, where we're
I see.
suddenly moving into political statements without any
Okay.
things said about let's not be political.
We have a question on the far side of the room.
Thank you. That created lots of anticipation, I think, unnecessary anticipation. It's just a question about artificial intelligence in music and to what extent it would go against precisely what we heard today, you know, about joy and in that jubilous sense that fights evil or encourages against suffering, that is so connected to human expression and because now it's so popular, all this talk about artificial intelligence, right? Especially in arts, but specifically in music. Any thoughts? It's a very open-ended question. How does that connect?
Guys ask the most difficult questions. Yeah, so AI is very interesting now. I mean, you can literally press a button and then, you know, and compose a song. And then you can put it on Spotify as your own. So what I'm trying to do is to try to expand the notion of music so that it's bigger than AI, if you think about it this way. If AI can only imitate music today, it's very good at doing the commercial music today. That's fine, but music is so much more than that, right? And if we are able to really get out of our heads a very narrow concept of music and have a very different relationship to music and our planet, then AI is not going to be able to imitate that in any form. Having said that, I think AI is a very powerful tool that can still be used, right, to help us to either analyze or grasp or compose music. So it's not that AI itself is bad in any sense like that. It's only the idea that AI might then take over what is human. But if humans begin to understand themselves a little bit more profoundly as, you know, what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean for humans to make music, and what's the relationship then between humanity and music in this bigger context that I'm trying to paint, then I think it will prevent us from having a very a misguided view about AI and all those sort of fears that it would have. I think the problem is more with us than with AI, right? And our conception of who we are and what the arts are for, and even how we define the arts themselves, right? Because otherwise, the world would just be endless imitation of what data we've already produced. But as I said, you know, music existed before humans, and it doesn't need humans to make it exist. And it doesn't need AI then to take it away. Yeah.
Please, here in the middle, yes.
Thank you so much for that talk. I really enjoyed it. So I want to bring it back to it. You started your talk by saying, calling music universal these days could be outdated. But I kind of feel that you have proved that music is joy, and joy is universal. Then aren't you arguing that music is universal?
Yeah. I think the universal gets a bad rap. I think it's partly because we don't understand what universals are for. Or we have, actually, when I talked about one, the idea of one, the way we think about one now and unity now, we have a very misguided view of concepts of unity and totality and oneness, right? But if we are able to have a better understanding, the term that I said, the harmony but not the same, there's the Chinese idea, we can begin to understand what universals can be, right? They're very, very dangerous universals. And what I'm trying to do here is say, well, you know, if we think of music in the most, you know, fundamental sense, just try to imagine that as repetition, all right, as rhythm. Actually, there's nothing else. It's just very, very basic. It's really, really basic stuff. And even the idea then that, of course, is repetition itself coherent? Does it make for a coherent sense of time, right? That's, again, very, very minimal conditions, right? But if that coherence is the beginning of the possibility of joy, then we can begin talking. But then, of course, things begin to proliferate. The whole point of rhythm, unlike harmony, is that it really is a complex adaptive system, right? It's not going to be the same every time, right? It is highly generative. So for me, if universals are generous and generative, they're good ones, right? But if they actually shut things down, if they're in some secret sense exclusionary, or if they're just really used as a weapon to have your way, in other words, it's more about force than fit and more about fear than joy, then of course universals are really, really dangerous. So I do think we have to think about universals, otherwise everything would fall apart, right? But how we think about universals is really, really important. I think music can help us do that, I think, especially if you think about what rhythm is and the fact that you can't really pin it down to one, simple thing. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. So that's really my point. Yeah.
Okay, we might have time. Okay, I think that's going to be about it for our question and answer period. Thank you so much for offering your insights. We will be having a reception in the foyer. So this is not the last time that you will have a chance to pose a question to Professor Chua. And other than that, please join me one last time in giving a hand to Professor Chua for his lovely insight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do come and speak to me in the reception.